Ever wondered how one mistake could bring down an entire company? Imagine this, a luxury community with 156 homes, a clubhouse, and a swimming pool, all proudly completed. But then, a shocking truth emerges. Every inch of it is built on land that doesn't belong to them. And the real owner? He stayed silent, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the time came, he made a move so powerful that it forced a massive real estate company to its knees. This is a story of patience, revenge, and a century-old trap finally springing shut. Picture this, a multi-million-dollar luxury housing development, 156 beautiful homes, a state-of-the-art clubhouse, a sparkling pool, and an HOA, Homeowners Association, controlling every little detail. On the surface, it's the dream, until the nightmare begins. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that everything, the homes, the amenities, the HOA, was built on land the developers never truly owned, and the rightful owner? He's been watching patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This isn't just a legal battle, it's a high-stakes chess game where every move counts. Westview Corporation, a powerful real estate giant, thought they could outsmart an old property clause. They bulldozed through legal warnings and built an empire on land that wasn't theirs. But hidden in the fine print of a century-old deed was a trap laid by my great-grandfather, meant to protect our family's land from greedy corporations like them. When Westview's HOA started flexing its power, charging residents unfair fees, threatening fines for the smallest infractions, they had no idea they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. Their arrogance blinded them. What they didn't expect was that the rightful landowner, that's me, was still here, and I wasn't about to let them walk away unscathed. For years, I watched as the HOA enforced its rules with an iron fist. Homeowners couldn't paint their front doors without permission. They fined families for leaving their trash cans out an hour too long. And when residents pushed back, Westview's lawyers were quick to remind them who was in control. But all along, I held the ultimate card, legal ownership of every square inch beneath their feet. So, how did I turn the tables on a multi-million-dollar corporation? How did their unchecked greed backfire so spectacularly? This is the story of how one man's patience and a forgotten legal clause not only brought down a corporate giant, but also transformed an entire community, on my terms. And trust me, the HOA, they didn't see it coming. For years, Westview Corporation and their HOA ruled Oak Ridge with an iron fist. Homeowners lived under a constant microscope. Every lawn perfectly trimmed, every mailbox painted the same shade of beige, and heaven forbid you left your holiday lights up a day too long. The HOA was ruthless. They handed out fines like candy. $50 for a trash can left out overnight, $200 if your grass was too long, and thousands if you dared to make unapproved renovations. And they never missed an opportunity to remind the residents who held the power. From the outside, Oak Ridge seemed like a picture-perfect suburban paradise. Behind the manicured lawns and uniform houses, though, resentment brewed. Homeowners whispered about the HOA's heavy-handed rules, their ever-increasing fees, and the constant threat of legal action if they didn't comply. But what could they do? They were trapped. At least that's what they thought. What no one realized was that the HOA's authority was built on a foundation of sand. The land under those pristine homes, it still legally belonged to my family. Decades ago, my great-grandfather had written a provision into the property's deed, a small but powerful clause designed to prevent anyone from claiming the land without our consent. Westview's lawyers missed it. The HOA ignored it, and that was their fatal mistake. I had known about the clause for years. When I first discovered it, I couldn't believe Westview had been so careless. I sent them a polite but firm letter informing them of the error and giving them a chance to correct it. Their response? Arrogance. They dismissed me outright, claiming their title was airtight and daring me to challenge them. And that's when I decided to wait. See, I knew something they didn't. As long as I held the legal title to the land, their entire operation was vulnerable. The HOA could fine residents all they wanted, but without clear ownership, they were enforcing rules on property they didn't actually own. Every time they sent a threatening letter or levied a new fee, they were building their empire on stolen ground. The residents, of course, had no idea. They trusted Westview and the HOA to follow the law. But I knew better. I watched as the HOA grew bolder, adding new fees, increasing dues, and even threatening to foreclose on homeowners who fell behind on payments. And with every overreach, my leverage grew stronger. Things came to a head when the HOA decided to fine a retired couple, the Thompsons, $5,000 for installing a wheelchair ramp without prior approval. The ramp was necessary. Mrs. Thompson had suffered a stroke, and her husband couldn't manage the stairs alone. But the HOA didn't care. They saw the ramp as a violation of their aesthetic standards and demanded immediate payment. That was the last straw. I knew the time had come to make my move. Armed with the original deed and the rock-solid legal provision my great-grandfather had written, I filed a lawsuit challenging Westview's ownership of the entire development. Overnight, the tables turned. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the community. Homeowners who had felt powerless for years suddenly realized the truth. The HOA didn't own their land. I did. And if my claim succeeded, Westview would lose everything. At first, Westview's lawyers laughed it off. They believed their legal team was invincible. But as the case progressed, the cracks in their foundation became impossible to ignore. Court documents revealed that the HOA had no legal standing to enforce rules on property they didn't legally own. Every fine, every fee, every foreclosure threat, they were all invalid. Homeowners who had once feared the HOA's power began reaching out to me. Stories poured in. Single parents fined for minor repairs, veterans threatened with foreclosure for late dues, elderly residents bullied into compliance. I realized that this wasn't just a legal fight. It was a fight for justice. The turning point came when the court ordered a full review of the property records. Under oath, Westview's executives had to admit they had overlooked the deed provision entirely. The judge's face was unreadable as the evidence piled up. For years, Westview had built an empire on land that was never legally theirs, and now that empire was on the verge of collapse. Behind closed doors, the HOA scrambled to contain the damage. Their carefully cultivated image of authority was crumbling. Homeowners who had once lived in fear were demanding answers, and the more questions they asked, the clearer it became that the HOA's power was nothing but an illusion. I wasn't just challenging Westview in court, I was dismantling the system they had built to control the community, and for the first time, the residents of Oak Ridge realized they had a choice. Westview tried every trick in the book to intimidate me. Cease and desist letters, settlement offers, even personal threats. But I had been patient for years, and I wasn't backing down now. This wasn't just about money. It was about righting a wrong that had gone unchecked for too long. When the media caught wind of the lawsuit, the story exploded. Headlines painted a picture of corporate greed meeting long overdue justice. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, eager to interview homeowners who had suffered under the HOA's reign. And the more people learned, the worse things got for Westview. As the legal battle intensified, the residents of Oak Ridge rallied behind me. They saw me not as a faceless landowner, but as someone willing to stand up against the injustice they had endured. And with their support, my case grew even stronger. In the end, Westview's arrogance became their undoing. They had underestimated the power of a simple legal clause, a clause my great-grandfather had written to protect our family's legacy, and now that legacy was about to bring their empire crashing down. The fight wasn't over yet, but one thing was clear. Westview and their HOA were no longer in control, and soon they would face the consequences of their greed. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers in expensive suits whispered furiously to each other, while Westview's executive team sat stone-faced, their confidence visibly shaken. Homeowners from Oak Ridge filled the seats behind me, their faces a mix of anger, hope, and anticipation. This wasn't just another corporate dispute, it was a reckoning, and everyone knew it. After months of legal maneuvering, the moment of truth had arrived. Westview had pulled every string, hired the best attorneys money could buy, and used the HOA's legal muscle to intimidate and suppress the community for years. But none of that mattered now. Their empire stood on crumbling ground, literally. The judge's gavel struck the bench as the final proceedings began. I sat beside my lawyer, calm but alert. I had waited patiently for years for this moment. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for justice. Westview's lead attorney stood first, delivering a polished but desperate argument. According to them, the HOA had been acting in good faith, enforcing community standards to preserve property values. They claimed that invalidating their authority would create chaos, an ungoverned neighborhood where anarchy would reign. But the homeowners knew better. They had lived under the HOA's oppressive rules for years. rules that favored Westview's profits over their well-being, and I had the evidence to prove it. My lawyer rose, delivering a simple but devastating argument. The deed provision wasn't a mistake. It was a legal safeguard, deliberately written to prevent exactly this kind of corporate exploitation. Westview had chosen to ignore it, and in doing so, had built an entire community on land they never legally owned. The HOA's power, a legal mirage. Their fines, unenforceable. Their threats, emptier than anyone had realized. And then came the final blow. Testimony from the homeowners themselves. Mr. Thompson took the stand first, his voice steady despite the obvious strain. He described how the HOA had fined him thousands of dollars for building a wheelchair ramp for his disabled wife. The ramp had allowed her to return home after her stroke, yet the HOA's response was cruelty disguised as bureaucracy. A single mother testified next. She had faced repeated harassment from the HOA for minor violations like leaving a child's bicycle in the driveway. When she fell behind on HOA fees during a medical emergency, they threatened to foreclose on her home. One by one, residents shared their stories of intimidation, financial hardship, and the ever-present fear that one wrong move would cost them everything. These weren't just legal technicalities. They were human lives caught in the crosshairs of corporate greed. The judge's expression grew harder with each account. Westview's attorneys objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. The truth was out, and no amount of legal spin could erase it. Then came the moment Westview had been dreading. My lawyer submitted the original deed into evidence. There, in my great-grandfather's handwriting, was the clause they had ignored, a clause that stripped the HOA of any authority and invalidated every fine and foreclosure attempt. For years, they had built their power on a legal illusion. And now, under the bright lights of the courtroom, that illusion shattered. When the judge called for a recessive, Westview's legal team huddled together, their confident facades slipping. Their empire was unraveling, and there was no easy way out. During the break, the atmosphere outside the courtroom was electric. Homeowners gathered around me, some thanking me, others simply expressing relief that someone had finally stood up against the HOA's tyranny. I wasn't just fighting for my family's legacy anymore. I was fighting for the entire community. When the judge returned, his decision came swiftly and decisively. He ruled that the deed provision was valid and enforceable. Westview's claim to the land was nullified. The HOA's authority over the homeowners was legally void. Every fine they had issued, every foreclosure threat, every dollar they had extracted, it was all illegitimate. Westview was ordered to compensate homeowners for wrongful fines and legal fees. But the biggest blow was yet to come. I wasn't interested in bankrupting the company. I wanted to ensure the community was protected moving forward. So my lawyer presented a settlement offer that would resolve everything. Westview would pay me $48 million to clear their liability and release property rights for the homes already sold. The HOA finished. Their legal authority dissolved. But there was a twist. The community amenities, the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts, would remain mine. And I had a new vision for them. Instead of keeping them locked behind HOA fees and rigid rules, I would open them to the entire neighborhood. No more elitism, no more arbitrary punishments, just a place where people could come together and actually feel like they belonged. The judge approved the settlement. And just like that, the empire Westview and their HOA had built came crashing down. For years, the homeowners had lived under the HOA's oppressive thumb, but now they were free. No more surprise fines, no more threats, just a community reclaiming its identity without corporate interference. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. Westview's CEO resigned under pressure. 3 board members stepped down. The HOA was officially dissolved, and the once feared organization became nothing more than a cautionary tale. As for me, life changed in ways I never could have imagined. I didn't just win a legal battle. I helped liberate an entire neighborhood from the grip of corporate greed. And the best part? Every time I drive through Oak Ridge, I'm reminded of what my great-grandfather knew all along. Land isn't just about ownership, it's about responsibility. And when you use that responsibility wisely, you can transform even the most unjust system into something far better. The HOA thought they had all the power, But in the end, it was a simple handwritten clause that brought them to their knees. And the community they tried to control, it's thriving now, free from fear, free from greed, and stronger than ever. In the aftermath of the courtroom victory, the effects rippled through every corner of Oak Ridge. What had once been a community ruled by fear and arbitrary rules was now a neighborhood on the brink of a new beginning, free from the oppressive grip of the HOA. Westview's settlement payment of $48 million arrived swiftly, but for me, the money was never the point. It was about restoring fairness and giving the people of Oak Ridge the freedom they had long been denied. Still, that kind of money provided an opportunity to reshape the community in ways the HOA never could have imagined. The first step? Dismantling the HOA's infrastructure. Their once powerful board, which had spent years issuing fines and foreclosure threats, was officially disbanded. No more petty citations for mailbox colors. No more surprise fees for leaving a garden hose out. The nightmare was over. The residents, many of whom had lived in constant anxiety, could finally breathe. And while Westview's executive team tried to spin the outcome as a mutually beneficial agreement, the truth was obvious to everyone. They had lost, completely. But my work wasn't finished. I knew that simply dismantling the HOA wasn't enough. The homeowners deserved not only freedom, but also the chance to rebuild their community on their own terms, without corporate interference. So I put a plan into motion to return power to the people where it belonged. With a portion of the settlement funds, I established a legal aid program specifically for the Oak Ridge residents. Any homeowner who had been wrongfully fined or threatened with foreclosure by the HOA was entitled to compensation. No more fighting alone against faceless corporate lawyers. This time, they had someone on their side. Next, I turned my attention to the community amenities, the ones Westview had so greedily used as leverage against the homeowners. Since the settlement allowed me to retain ownership of the clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts, I decided to use them in a way that would benefit the entire area. Gone were the days when these amenities were exclusive to Oak Ridge residents who followed every arbitrary rule. I opened the facilities to the broader community for a modest membership fee, with free access for low-income families and seniors. The once restrictive clubhouse was transformed into a vibrant hub for local events, book clubs, fitness classes, and community meetings that encouraged open dialogue instead of rigid enforcement. The tennis courts, once a symbol of elite privilege, became a place where kids from all over town could take free lessons. I hired local instructors and ensured that any child, regardless of their background, had the chance to play. Meanwhile, the pool became a gathering place rather than a point of contention. Senior swim mornings were introduced 3 days a week, providing a safe and welcoming space for older residents to enjoy. And the 12 unsold homes that had been caught in the middle of the legal battle, I refused to let them become another tool for corporate greed. Instead, I sold 8 of them at affordable prices to essential community workers, teachers, firefighters, and nurses, people who had dedicated their lives to serving others, but had been priced out of neighborhoods like Oak Ridge. The remaining 4 homes, I turned them into temporary housing for families displaced by hardship, whether from natural disasters, job loss, or other unforeseen crises. No one should lose their home because of circumstances beyond their control, and I was determined to ensure that these properties became a safety net for those in need. Through all these changes, something incredible happened. Oak Ridge evolved into a true community, one that prioritized people over profit. Without the HOA's watchful eye enforcing unnecessary rules, neighbors began connecting in ways they never had before. Instead of worrying about fines or penalties, they focused on building relationships and supporting one another. Community events became a regular occurrence at what was now called Harrington Clubhouse. Every month, we hosted everything from neighborhood potlucks to charity drives, and the turnout continued to grow. Formerly isolated residents, once fearful of stepping out of line, became active participants in shaping the neighborhood's future. And while Westview licked its wounds, the residents of Oak Ridge thrived. But the most profound transformation wasn't just the legal victory or the financial windfall. It was the cultural shift within the community itself. Freed from the HOA's oppressive grip, people rediscovered what it meant to belong. Instead of feeling like tenants under corporate oversight, They became stewards of the place they called home. One of the most symbolic moments came a few months after the settlement when we hosted an event called Neighbors First. It was a celebration of the community's newfound freedom and an opportunity to reflect on how far we had come. During the event, a retired teacher who had lived under the HOA for over a decade stood up to speak. She described the fear she used to feel every time she received a letter from the HOA, worried it might threaten her home. With tears in her eyes, she thanked me, not just for ending that fear, but for giving the community a new sense of hope. Her words stuck with me. What started as a legal battle to protect my family's land had evolved into something far greater, a mission to protect people from corporate overreach and ensure no one else suffered under an unjust system. Ironically, I had become something of an unofficial mayor of Oak Ridge. At first, the title amused me, but over time, I realized it wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. My great-grandfather had known this truth a century earlier when he wrote the deed provision to protect our land. Now, I was simply carrying that legacy forward. And the irony didn't end there. Westview, in their greed, had built an entire community on land they didn't own. They had used the HOA as their weapon of control, believing no one could challenge their authority. But in the end, their arrogance became their undoing. By the time the dust settled, 3 members of Westview's board had resigned. Jessica, the executive who had tried to intimidate me into a low-ball settlement, quietly stepped down. The company was forced to sell off major assets just to cover the $48 million settlement, a public humiliation that left them reeling for years to come. And while they struggled to recover, Oak Ridge flourished. I often think back to my great-grandfather's handwritten note, the one I found in the archives after the settlement was finalized. His words, scrawled in the margin, remain etched in my mind. Land is legacy. Protect it not just from today's threats, but from tomorrow's as well. Those words became my guiding principle. My victory over Westview wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about safeguarding a community's right to live free from corporate exploitation. And as I stand on the ridge today, overlooking Oak Ridge, I no longer see the invasion I once resented. Instead, I see a thriving, connected neighborhood, a testament to the power of patience, justice, and the enduring value of doing what's right. Westview thought they could bully their way to victory, but in the end, a single clause in an old deed brought them to their knees, and in its place, a stronger, fairer community was born. The battle with Westview wasn't just a legal fight. It became a defining chapter in the story of Oak Ridge. What began as corporate greed and HOA tyranny evolved into something no one could have anticipated, a community reborn, free from oppressive control, and empowered to chart its own future. As the dust settled, the transformation was undeniable. Oak Ridge was no longer a place where homeowners tiptoed around HOA rules, terrified that a misplaced flower pot or an unapproved paint color would bring fines or threats of foreclosure. That era was over permanently. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, people began to reclaim their homes, not just physically but emotionally. Yards once restricted by uniformity flourished with individuality. Some residents planted vegetable gardens, others built playgrounds for their kids, and the anxiety that had once hung over every household faded into a distant memory. The impact extended far beyond property lines. With the HOA gone, a sense of freedom swept through Oak Ridge. People who had previously avoided their neighbors out of fear of gossip or HOA snitching now gathered at the Harrington Clubhouse for community potlucks and celebrations. The oppressive silence that once blanketed the neighborhood was replaced by laughter, conversation, and a renewed sense of belonging. One of the most visible changes was how the community amenities evolved. Under the HOA's rule, the clubhouse and pool had been symbols of exclusion, privileges reserved only for those who followed the HOA's rigid mandates. Now these spaces were open to the broader community. Local children who had never set foot in a tennis court were learning to play, coached by volunteer instructors who understood the value of opportunity. Seniors, once isolated by the HOA's cold policies, found comfort in morning swim hours designed specifically for their needs. The clubhouse, which had once been a sterile meeting place for HOA rule enforcement, became a bustling center of community life, hosting everything from craft fairs to movie nights. And perhaps most importantly, the fear was gone. For years, homeowners had lived under the constant threat of fines and foreclosure, powerless against the HOA's legal maneuvers. Now, thanks to the settlement, those fears were erased. Every resident received corrected deeds, free from the HOA's overreach, and the legal aid program I established ensured that no one would ever face another legal battle alone. The 12 unsold homes, once a point of leverage for Westview, became symbols of a new era. Selling 8 of those homes at affordable prices to community heroes, teachers, nurses, and first responders was one of the most rewarding decisions I made. These were people who had dedicated their lives to others but could never afford to live in a neighborhood like Oak Ridge. Now, they were part of the fabric of the community. The 4 remaining homes served a different but equally important purpose. By converting them into temporary housing for families in crisis, we created a safety net that would outlast any legal battle. Whenever a family faced displacement due to disaster or hardship, those homes would be there, offering a place to regroup and rebuild. In the months following the settlement, the fallout for Westview continued. While Oak Ridge thrived, the corporation struggled to recover from both the financial and reputational damage. Publicly, they downplayed the settlement as a business adjustment, but internally, the cracks were undeniable. Jessica, the once confident executive who had led the aggressive HOA campaign, quietly resigned. 3 board members, unable to explain how they had missed the critical deed provision, stepped down in disgrace. And as Westview scrambled to secure emergency financing to cover the $48 million payout, the broader real estate industry took notice. A warning shot to every corporation tempted to put profits over people. But for me, the real victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in the community we built from their mistakes. I often think back to the day I found my great-grandfather's handwritten note, the words that had started it all. Land is legacy. Protect it not just from today's threats, but from tomorrow's as well. Those words had guided me through the long, patient fight against Westview. And in the end, they became more than just a family motto. They became a philosophy that reshaped an entire neighborhood. Oak Ridge became a living testament to the idea that true power doesn't come from corporate boardrooms or legal fine print. It comes from people, ordinary people, who refuse to be bullied, who stand together, and who believe that their community is worth protecting. Ironically, the HOA's downfall created something more enduring than any bylaw or restriction ever could. A community bound by shared values of fairness, inclusion, and resilience. These days, I walk through Oak Ridge with a sense of pride. The clubhouse buzzes with life. Kids splash in the pool without worrying about arbitrary rules. Neighbors who once felt like strangers now share meals, stories, and support. And as I stand on the ridge overlooking the neighborhood, a place that was once a battlefield, I no longer see a threat to my family's legacy. I see a community that represents everything my great-grandfather believed in, protecting what matters, standing up for what's right, and ensuring that future generations inherit something worth cherishing. Westview may have tried to control this land with greed and legal trickery, but they failed to understand the most powerful truth of all. Sometimes the strongest legacy isn't the one you inherit, it's the one you create. If this story of patience, justice, and standing up against corporate greed inspired you, there's more where that came from. The battle against Westview's HOA wasn't just about legal victories. It was about proving that no corporation, no matter how powerful, can strip people of their homes and dignity without facing consequences. But here's the thing. Stories like these happen every day. Homeowners across the country face similar battles against overreaching HOAs and corporate bullies who think the rules don't apply to them. Some win, some lose, but all of them deserve to have their voices heard. That's where you come in. If you want to hear more stories of ordinary people taking on extraordinary fights and winning, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Because trust me, there are more jaw-dropping stories of corporate takedowns and long